Commander Ji-hoon pressed his hand against the cool metal wall of the exploration ship New Horizon as he watched the alien structure grow larger on the main screen. It looked nothing like the space stations humans built with sharp angles and gray metal. This one seemed to be made of crystal and light, flowing in curves that reminded him of ocean waves frozen in time. "Captain Mina," called Navigator Hyun from his station, his voice tight with excitement and worry. "We are getting messages from them, many different signals. It sounds like they are singing to us." Mina walked over to stand beside Ji-hoon. She had been chosen to lead this first contact mission because she could stay calm under pressure. Right now, that skill was being tested. "Can the computer translate what they are saying?" "Working on it," Hyun replied, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "The computer says it is not really language like we know it, more like music with meaning." Through the speakers came a sound unlike anything they had ever heard. It was beautiful, like wind chimes mixed with whale songs, but somehow the humans could feel the welcome in it. The universal translator hummed and clicked as it worked to make sense of the alien communication. Diplomatic specialist Solman stepped forward, checking her equipment one more time. She had studied every known form of first contact protocol, but none of the training had prepared her for singing aliens. "Are we ready for this?" she asked quietly. "As ready as we can be," Mina answered. "Remember, we represent all of humanity today." The docking process was smooth and gentle. The alien station seemed to embrace their ship rather than lock onto it. Through the viewing ports, they could see beings moving on the other side, tall and graceful with skin that seemed to glow from within. The airlock opened with a soft whisper, and the humans got their first look at the Galactic Coalition. The lead alien was taller than any human, with long limbs and translucent skin that showed flowing patterns of light beneath. Her voice was like music when she spoke. "Welcome, children of the distant star," she said, the translator making her words understandable, but keeping the musical quality. "I am Ambassador Lirale of the Valteri. We have waited long to meet another young species that has found its way to the stars." Behind her stood representatives from other species, each stranger than the last. One looked like a walking tree made of silver metal. Another seemed to be made of shifting purple gas held in a loose humanoid shape. A third had wings like a butterfly, but was the size of a human child. "Thank you for welcoming us," Mina replied, bowing slightly as Earth protocols suggested. "I am Captain Mina of the human species. We come in peace, seeking friendship and knowledge." "Peace," the ambassador repeated, and somehow the word sounded different when she said it, fuller of meaning. "Yes, we sense this in you, but also something else. Something we have not felt in a very long time." The humans were led through corridors that seemed to be grown rather than built. Everything curved and flowed, with soft lights that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Other aliens stopped to watch them pass, their expressions curious but peaceful. They entered what the ambassador called the Harmony Chamber, a vast room with a domed ceiling that showed the stars outside. In the center was a circular area with cushions arranged in patterns that somehow looked both random and perfectly ordered. "Please, sit with us," Ambassador Lirale said. "We will share the ritual of understanding, where we learn of each other through shared thoughts and feelings." As they sat down, Salmon noticed how her human companions automatically chose positions that gave them clear views of all the exits and approaches. It was not a conscious decision, just something humans did naturally. She realized the aliens had not done the same thing. They sat where the cushions looked most comfortable, their backs to doorways, completely relaxed. The ritual began with more singing, this time from all the aliens present. The sound filled the chamber and seemed to make the walls themselves vibrate with harmony. The humans listened, trying to understand, but found themselves analyzing instead. Ji-hoon was noting the acoustic properties of the room. Hyun was mentally mapping the positions of all the beings present. Mina was calculating how long it would take to reach the exits if needed. Then came the test. though the humans did not realize it was a test at the time. Ambassador Lirale created a holographic display showing a simple scenario. Two groups of beings needed the same resources from a disputed planet. How would they solve this problem? The alien representatives immediately began discussing cooperation. They talked about sharing schedules and resource rotation. They suggested meditation to understand each other's needs better. One proposed that both groups work together to find alternative resources elsewhere. The humans listened politely, but their minds worked differently. Soman found herself thinking about which group had better defensive positions. Ji-hoon considered supply line vulnerabilities. Mina calculated how many ships each side could deploy and how long a blockade might last. Hyun was already planning 3 different ways to control the space around the planet. When it was their turn to speak, the humans presented their analysis with the same calm professionalism they used for everything else. They talked about strategic advantages, tactical considerations, and the importance of controlling key locations. They did not realize that every word they spoke was causing the alien delegates to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The chamber fell silent when they finished. The aliens looked at each other with expressions the humans could not read, but the feeling in the room had changed. Where there had been curiosity and welcome, now there was something else. Not fear exactly, but a kind of careful wariness. Ambassador Lirale spoke slowly, her musical voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Your species thinks in ways we have not encountered before. You see patterns that we do not see. Mina sensed the shift in mood, but did not understand its cause. We simply try to be thorough in our analysis, she replied. Yes, the ambassador said quietly. We are beginning to understand that about your kind. 3 months had passed since humanity joined the Galactic Coalition as probationary members. The humans had tried their best to fit in, attending cultural exchange programs and learning the peaceful ways of their new alien friends. But everything changed when the emergency alarm sounded across every Coalition world. Military advisor Daeho was in his small office on the Coalition station when the walls began flashing red. The musical tones that usually filled the corridors were replaced by urgent, discordant sounds that made his teeth ache. Through his window, he could see alien ships rushing in all directions. Their graceful movements now, frantic and disorganized. All species representatives report to the emergency assembly immediately, announced a voice that the translator made sound worried and afraid. In the great assembly hall, Daeho found himself sitting next to Yuna, who had been appointed as humanity's strategic consultant. Around them, hundreds of alien delegates filled the curved seating areas, their various forms of communication creating a chaos of sounds, lights, and smells that the universal translators struggled to process. Ambassador Lirale stood at the center of the hall, her usually bright skin now dim with worry. The holographic display above her showed a series of destroyed worlds, each one reduced to floating debris and cooling rock. The ancient construct we call the Devourer has awakened, she announced, her musical voice carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. 14 worlds have been consumed in 6 days. The pattern shows it is moving toward the core systems of our coalition. Daeho leaned forward, studying the destruction patterns on the display. Even from this distance, he could see the systematic nature of the attacks. This was not random violence or emotional fury. This was methodical harvesting. The Zephyrian delegate, a being that looked like a floating cloud of silver particles, spoke first. We must attempt communication. Perhaps this intelligence is in pain. Perhaps we can understand what drove it to such actions and help it heal. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Other delegates began proposing similar solutions. The tree-like arboreals suggested growing protective barriers around threatened worlds. The crystalline resonari offered to create harmonic shields that might confuse the construct's sensors. We should focus on evacuation, suggested another voice. If we cannot stop this entity, We must save as many lives as possible. Yuna shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had been listening to these proposals for 20 minutes, and every single one was reactive. Every solution assumed the devourer would continue its current behavior while they tried to work around it. Respectfully, Yuna said, standing up. The hall fell quiet as hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on her. The devourer has destroyed 14 worlds in 6 days. Its movement pattern suggests it is not responding to emotion or trauma. It is following a systematic resource acquisition protocol. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Several delegates seemed physically pained by her words. "What do you suggest?" Ambassador Lirelei asked carefully. Deho stood up beside Yuna. "We need to stop it, permanently." The word stop seemed to cause a ripple of distress through the assembly. The Zephyrian delegates' silver particles swirled faster. The arboreal's branches drooped. Even Ambassador Lirelei's light dimmed further. "You mean destroy it?" asked a delegate from the back of the hall, the translator making the question sound horrified. "I mean neutralize the threat," Deho replied. He gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed the construct's projected path. "Look at its movement pattern. It follows predictable routes between systems, always choosing the path with the most resource rilds we can use. That against it." He walked closer to the display, pointing at various star systems. "If we position interceptor fleets here and here, we can funnel it toward this nebula cluster. The gravity wells there will slow it down. Then we hit it with coordinated strikes at its power distribution nodes." The assembly hall was completely silent now. Deho realized that many of the aliens were not just listening to his words, but watching his movements, the way he pointed at systems and drew invisible lines between them. He was thinking in 3 dimensions, calculating angles of attack and defensive positions, and they could see it in every gesture he made. "You speak of warfare," Ambassador Lirelei said quietly. "I speak of problem-solving," Deho replied. "This construct cannot be reasoned with or healed or avoided. It will continue to consume worlds until it is stopped. We can stop it cleanly and efficiently if we act now." Yuna activated her personal tablet and projected her own analysis above the assembly. The construct's design suggests it has limited adaptive capability. It has been successful because no one has opposed it directly. It expects to encounter resistance only at individual worlds, not coordinated fleet actions across multiple systems. The alien delegates stared at the tactical projections with a mixture of fascination and horror. The humans had not just analyzed the devourer's capabilities, they had identified its weaknesses and designed a strategy to exploit them. "This is how you think," said the Zephyrian delegate, not as a question but as a realization, not about healing or understanding or cooperation. "You think about victory and defeat. We think about solutions," Yuna replied simply. When the coalition finally approved the human battle plan, it was with great reluctance and fear. Not fear of the devourer, but fear of what they were unleashing by asking humans to wage war on their behalf. The operation took 18 hours. When it was over, the devourer was disabled and drifting harmlessly in the nebula where Deho had predicted it would be trapped. But the victory came with a cost the humans did not expect. Word of their success spread across the galaxy faster than their ships could travel. Humanity had not just won a battle. They had demonstrated something that terrified the peaceful coalition. The humans were not just capable of war, they were good at it. 1 year after the Devourer incident, Kung found himself in the most unusual job of his military career. He sat in a circular room made of living coral that glowed soft blue, surrounded by beings who had never held a weapon or planned a battle in their entire lives. The Harmony Council had called him here to solve a problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for 300 years. "The situation is quite complex," explained Counselor Vash, a tall being with skin like flowing water. The Rillen Mining Consortium and the Dek Agricultural Collective have been in dispute over the Tertius system for centuries. Every attempt at mediation has failed. Kyung studied the holographic display showing the contested star system. 3 planets, 2 asteroid belts, and 1 very angry collection of species who could not agree on anything. What exactly are they fighting about? Resources, territory, mining rights, water access, listed another counselor, her tentacles waving in distress. The list of grievances fills 17,000 pages of documentation. Have you read all 17,000 pages? Kyung asked. The counselors looked surprised by the question. Of course. We have studied every complaint, every historical claim, every cultural significance statement. The complexity is overwhelming. Kyung leaned back in his chair, thinking. Cultural interpreter Jisoo, who had been brought along to help with communication, watched the counselors with interest. She had noticed something in their explanation that seemed important. What do the Rylans actually need from this system? Kyung asked. They need the mineral deposits in the asteroid belts for their industrial processes, Counselor Vash replied promptly. And what do the Vec actually need? They need the water from the 3rd planet for their agricultural projects. Kyung was quiet for a moment. So the Rylans need rocks, and the Vec need water. Why is this a 300-year problem? The counselors exchanged glances. Well, there are overlapping territorial claims, historical grievances dating back. 2. What are they afraid of? Kyung interrupted. The question seemed to confuse the counselors. Afraid of Jisoo leaned forward. I think what Kyung means is, what does each side think the other side will do to hurt them? Understanding dawned on Counselor Vash's fluid features. The Rylans fear that the Vec agricultural processes will poison their mining workers with chemical runoff. The Dek fear that the Rillen deep mining will collapse the underground water systems they depend on. Kyung nodded, so neither side trusts the other not to destroy what they really need. Within 2 weeks, Kyung had designed a solution that made the counselors stare at him in amazement. He divided the system into zones based on what each species actually required, with buffer areas that prevented either group from accidentally damaging the other's operations. More importantly, he designed the zones so that breaking the agreement would cost more than keeping it. The Rylans get exclusive mining rights to these asteroids, which have better mineral concentrations anyway, he explained, pointing at the holographic display. The Vec get exclusive water rights to the 3rd planet, plus these 3 moons, which have even more water than they currently use. But what stops them from expanding into each other's areas? Asked the counselor. Physics Kung replied simply. The Rillen mining zones are positioned so that any expansion toward that territory would destabilize their own operations. The agricultural zones are designed so that contaminating the Rillen areas would poison their own water supply. The solution worked perfectly. Within 3 months, both sides had signed agreements and begun peaceful operations. But the success created a new problem for humanity. Sunho discovered this problem when he arrived at his next assignment in the Outer Rim. The transport captain, a nervous Veltari, kept glancing at him during the journey. You are the human strategic advisor? The captain asked finally. Yes. Why? The pirates in the Kepler belt have been monitoring coalition communications. They know you are coming, and 3 of the 5 major pirate clans have already sent surrender messages to the Outer Rim Security Council. Sunho stared at the captain. They surrendered before I even got here. Word travels fast about human tactical advisors. The stories say that humans do not just respond to problems, they prevent them from happening in the first place. When Sunho finally reached the Kepler belt, he found the situation even stranger than the captain had described. The 2 remaining pirate clans were so busy trying to predict what a human advisor might do that they had accidentally solved most of their own problems. They moved their bases 3 times in the past month, explained Commander Trill of the local security force. Each time they chose locations that were actually less strategic than where they started. They seemed to be second-guessing themselves into making mistakes. Stories like this began spreading across the galaxy faster than news reports. Humans who could walk into conflicts that had lasted centuries and resolve them in weeks. Peacekeepers who ended wars by understanding what each side was really fighting about, not what they claimed to be fighting about. Jisoo found herself collecting these stories as part of her cultural documentation work. In system after system, the pattern was the same. Humans would arrive, ask simple questions that no one else had thought to ask, and design solutions that addressed the real problems instead of the obvious ones. They call us gods of war now, Jisoo mentioned to Sunho during one of their regular briefings. Sunho looked uncomfortable with the title. We are not gods. We just understand how conflict works. That is exactly what makes you terrifying too. Them, Jisoo replied. Other species see conflict as chaos, something unpredictable that must be endured. You see it as a system with rules and patterns that can be understood and controlled. The galaxy had begun to realize something that humanity had never thought remarkable. While other species had achieved peace by forgetting how to think about conflict, humans had achieved peace by understanding conflict so completely that they could predict it, redirect it, or end it before it became destructive. It was not that humans loved war. It was that they were impossibly good at it, even when they were trying to prevent it. The warning came from the deep space monitoring stations first. Strange signals from beyond the galactic rim, too organized to be natural, too aggressive to be friendly. Within days, long-range telescopes confirmed what the coalition had hoped, never to see: a massive fleet emerging from the dark. Space between galaxies. Mina stood in the coalition's first war room in 10,000 years, watching as panicked reports flooded in from the outer systems. The enemy fleet was enormous, thousands of ships arranged in perfect geometric formations that spoke of ruthless efficiency. The beings who built them called themselves the Harvesters, and their reputation had traveled ahead of them through desperate transmissions from dying civilizations. 43 galaxies, Admiral Ji-hoon said quietly, reading from the intelligence reports. They have consumed 43 entire galaxies, trillions upon trillions of lives. Around the circular table sat representatives from 800 coalition species, each looking more frightened and lost than the last. These were beings who had spent millions of years perfecting the arts of peace, cooperation, and harmony. The concept of galactic war was as foreign to them as breathing underwater. Ambassador Lirelei spoke first, her musical voice trembling. We must attempt communication. Perhaps we can understand their needs and find a peaceful solution. We tried, replied the Zephyrian delegate, his silver particles swirling with agitation. Our first contact teams sent every form of greeting, welcome, and peace offering in the galactic database. The Harvesters destroyed the messenger ships without responding. The crystalline collective representative chimed softly. We could hide our worlds in dimensional pockets. Our technology could phase entire star systems out of normal space until they pass. For how long? Asked Ji-hoon. The intelligence reports suggest they have been harvesting galaxies for millions of years. They are patient. They will wait. Yun activated the strategic display, showing the Harvester fleet's approach vector. They have 40 million combat vessels arranged in a formation designed for systematic galactic consumption. Their advanced scouts probe each system, catalog its resources, then mark it for harvesting. They are not exploring or raiding. This is industrial-scale extermination. The alien delegates stared at the display with growing horror. The Harvesters' formation was beautiful in its terrible efficiency, a spiral pattern that would sweep through the galaxy like a deadly flower blooming in reverse. What do you suggest? Ambassador Lirelei asked, though her tone suggested she already knew she would not like the answer. Mina stood up, her new title of Supreme Strategic Coordinator feeling heavier than any rank she had ever held. We fight them. The words seemed to physically pain the assembled delegates. Several of the more sensitive species made distressed sounds. The arboreal's branches drooped so low, they touched the floor. Fight, repeated the Veltari ambassador, as if testing an unfamiliar word. You mean organized violence on a galactic scale? I mean we give the coalition species something they have never had before, Mina replied. A coordinated offensive strategy. Deho stepped forward, activating his own tactical projections. The harvesters are used to fighting reactive enemies, species that build defensive lines around their most important worlds and wait to be attacked. They have developed their tactics for overcoming static resistance. But we are not going to give them static resistance, added Kyung, highlighting different areas of the galactic map. We are going to give them something they have never encountered before. A galaxy that fights back as a single coordinated organism. What followed was the most intensive strategic planning session in galactic history. For 3 months, human advisors worked with coalition species to transform 800 different, peaceful civilizations into a unified military force. The training was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Soman found herself teaching Veltari engineers how to think about supply line vulnerabilities. Haon worked with Cephrian pilots to help them understand formation tactics. Sunho spent weeks explaining to crystalline commanders why destroying the enemy was sometimes the most merciful option. Your species thinks about war like we think about music, observed one young Veltari student during a tactics lesson. You see patterns and harmonies that we cannot perceive. The hardest part was not teaching the aliens to fight. The hardest part was teaching them to think like predators instead of prey. For millions of years, they had approached every conflict as potential victims looking for ways to minimize damage. Humans taught them to approach conflict as hunters looking for ways to achieve decisive victory. When the Harvester's advanced scouts reached the outer systems, they found something unprecedented. Instead of defensive installations protecting populated worlds, they found empty space and sensor ghosts. Instead of panicked evacuations, they found coordinated withdrawal toward prepared positions. Phase 1 complete, reported Yuna from the hidden command center. The enemy has taken the bait. They think we are retreating in disorder. The Harvester fleet moved deeper into coalition space, following what appeared to be a fleeing, disorganized enemy. Their formation remained perfect, their approach methodical. They had done this same dance of pursuit and consumption in 43 galaxies before. Phase 2, Mina ordered. Across 1,000 star systems simultaneously, the trap closed. Coalition fleets appeared from hidden positions, striking not at the Harvester ships directly, but at their support networks, communication relays, and supply formations. The galaxy's peaceful technologies had been transformed into weapons of incredible precision under human guidance. The war lasted 6 months. When it ended, the Harvester fleet was scattered across the galaxy, their invasion network dismantled with surgical precision. They had never encountered a prey species that could think strategically, plan comprehensively, and execute flawlessly across such vast distances. The victory celebration was muted. The coalition had won, but they had also learned something about themselves that they would never forget. They had discovered that peace was not simply the absence of war. Sometimes, peace was something that had to be fought for. 2 years after the Harvester War ended, the galaxy was a quieter place than it had been in thousands of years. Not the peaceful quiet that the coalition had known before, but a different kind of silence. It was the quiet of a galaxy that had learned to think about its own survival. Heon walked through the corridors of the new Coalition Academy, watching young beings from dozens of species struggle with concepts that human children learned while playing games. In one classroom, a group of Veltari students stared at a simple tactical exercise with expressions of deep confusion. "I do not understand why the blue team would choose this position," said one student, her crystalline features reflecting the holographic display. "It gives them no advantage in resource gathering." But it controls the high ground, replied her human instructor patiently. From there, they can see everything the red team does, while remaining hidden themselves. Why would they want to remain hidden? Would it not be better to communicate openly and share resources? The instructor, a young woman named Minji, had been asked this same question hundreds of times. She had learned to answer it with a story rather than an explanation. Imagine. You are a farmer, she said. You work very hard to grow food for your family. One day, someone comes to your farm and takes half of your crops without asking. What do? We would discuss the situation and find a solution that meets everyone's needs. The student replied immediately. But what if that person does not want to discuss anything? What if they just take your food and leave? The student was quiet for a long time. Then we would need to stop them from taking our food. And how would you do that? Another long pause. We would need to think like they think, to understand what they might do next. Minji nodded. That is strategy. Understanding not just what you want to do, but what others might do, and planning for all the possibilities. In another part of the academy, Jisoo was writing the final chapter of her official history of the Harvester War. She paused at her desk as she watched human children playing in the gardens outside her window. They were engaged in elaborate games that involved building alliances, planning attacks, and defending territories with the same casual ease that other species' children used for art or music. A group of young coalition aliens watched the human children play, their expressions a mixture of fascination and unease. The games looked fun, but there was something about the way the human children thought that made the alien children uncomfortable. Why do they always think about fighting? Asked a young Zephyrian, his silver particles swirling with confusion. They are not thinking about fighting, explained his Veltori friend thoughtfully. They are thinking about ... patterns. About what might happen, and how to be ready for it. Jisoo smiled as she listened to the children trying to understand each other. The young ones adapted faster than their parents, but even they struggled with the fundamental difference in how human minds worked. Commander Mina found Jisoo at her desk later that evening. The war had changed both women, adding lines to their faces and weight to their steps. But it had also given them something neither had expected, a clear understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. How is the history coming along? Mina asked, settling into the chair beside Jisoo's desk. Almost finished. The hardest part is explaining why we think the way we do, without making it sound like a curse. Mina looked out at the gardens, where the children had been playing. Is it a curse? Jisoo considered the question carefully. The other species achieved peace by breeding the capacity for strategic conflict out of themselves. Over millions of years, they selected for cooperation, harmony, and trust. They created a galaxy where war was impossible, because no one could think like a warrior. But that left them defenseless when something from outside threatened them. Exactly, they had forgotten that peace is not just the absence of conflict. Peace is something that sometimes has to be protected. Mina nodded slowly. Earth was different. We evolved on a world where cooperation and competition existed side by side. We learned that understanding your enemy does not make you evil. It makes you capable of protecting what you love. The next morning brought news that would have been impossible before the war. 3 different species had requested human strategic advisors to help them resolve internal disputes. Not because they wanted to fight wars, but because they had learned that understanding conflict was the best way to prevent it. Admiral Ji-hoon read the reports with mixed feelings. They are starting to think like us, he observed to his staff. Is that good or bad? Asked Sun-ho. It is necessary, Ji-hoon replied. The galaxy learned that it needed guardians. Beings who could think strategically, not because they loved war, but because they understood that the alternative to strategic thinking was eventual destruction. In the final entry of her historical record, Jisoo wrote, "The galaxy calls humanity gods of war, not because we seek conflict, but because we understand. it completely, while other species achieved peace by forgetting how to think about war. We achieved peace by mastering the art of war so thoroughly that we could prevent it, direct it, or end it as needed. We became the sword that protects the garden of galactic peace, not because we wanted to carry that burden, but because someone had to. In a universe that had forgotten the price of safety, humanity remembered. And in remembering, we chose to use our knowledge, not to conquer, but to protect. The children, playing in our gardens, understand games of strategy and conflict as naturally as breathing. This is not because humans love war. It is because we understand that the capacity for war, properly controlled and wisely used, is sometimes the only thing that can preserve peace. We are the guardians the galaxy never knew it needed, watching from the darkness so that others can continue to live in the light. The title would remain forever, Gods of War, but the galaxy had finally learned what that title really meant. It meant that among all the species that had chosen peace through forgetting, one had chosen peace through remembering. And that made all the difference.